This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. Thanks for tuning in to the show that talks about the touchy subject of race and race reconciliation and what do we need to do in this country to become one human nation. And we go about this process by attempting to create a safe, honest, open, and productive environment so that everyone can share stories about race and learn about race. So before we get started with today's topic, I do want to just share this little disclaimer with you that the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. We've been talking about the iceberg culture, and if you go to the website that is set up to go with the topics on the show, that website is www.onehumannation.info. If you click on resources, you're going to see this iceberg that I'm referring to. So we've talked about when you think about an iceberg and you picture an iceberg, what is showing above the surface is the external. It's what you see. And that's what we refer to as external culture, surface culture, things like food, flags, festivals, fashion, holidays, music, performances, dances, games, that kind of stuff. And then below the iceberg, the deep stuff, the stuff that's really moving that iceberg along is what we refer to as our internal culture. And this is where the difficulty really starts with trying to move through a race reconciliation process, because this is where we have to look internally at those dark places and figure out what is going on inside me. What have I been exposed to? What's been my environment? What kind of communication styles and rules do I have that are just embedded in me? What are my notions of courtesy and manners and everything from cleanliness to beauty? What other concepts have I internalized about time and being on time, or if I'm late, and attitudes towards everything from how we raise our children to how we deal with our aging population, how we view even, cooperation versus competition. So when we talk about reconciliation, it's not about judging other people and what other people should do or shouldn't do, or what they should have said and should not have said. And granted, if it's right there in front of your face and you feel comfortable about addressing something that you consider to be racist, that's totally on you. But it's not for you to go around looking for those things outside of what you can control without looking inside. So I'm very excited. We're going to have a guest today that I connected with during my time in Austin, and she's going to share some of the insights that she's learned along the way about this iceberg culture, external, internal. realizing it's something that it is difficult to talk about. You may feel some tension and you may feel uncomfortable. One of the communication agreements that I absolutely love with this initiative that I was involved in Austin called the One Human Race Initiative, one of the original founders, she came up with this way that we should approach this topic. And she basically stated, you may have an emotional reaction to something you view, hear, or experience. Be aware of your reactions and responses. Take care of yourself. Try to stay engaged. The divine can be found in the tension. And I love that. Whether you believe in a divine or not, the concept of this is going to be uncomfortable. And the way we're going to move through reconciliation to get to healing, we're going to have some discomfort and be prepared to have these conversations. But you do have to take care of yourself. Another phrase that I heard this past weekend that I really like was in reference to a counselor that was talking to a youth she was counseling, and she mentioned to this youth, you know, what you need to learn how to do is how to stay in your lane but still be engaged. Because we have a tendency when we're making judgments, we just want to shut down. We don't want to deal with the other person or the situation. It's a flight syndrome. It's like, let me just get out of this situation. Now, granted, if it's not a safe situation, that's not necessarily a bad reaction. But if it's a situation where it's really going to involve an ongoing dialogue, then that's why we have these communication agreements. That's why when you contact the One Human Nation show and you want to share your story, we emphasize how important it is to use your I voice. Not to say, well, Sandy, this is something that I heard, unless you're going to be using your I voice to say, this is how I responded to what happened to me, whatever. It could have been last week, it could have been 10 years ago, or this is what I thought when this was said. You have to use your I voice because that takes you out of judging and speaking your truth. And the other concept of really engaging in a reconciliation process is realizing that we don't have to be in agreement. Reconciliation is not about agreement. At the end of the day, it doesn't mean that we have to go to the same church or we have to, smile and call each other on the phone every day. If it's like, this is not a person that's really in my comfort zone to deal with it over a long period of time, you have to manage that and take care of yourself. But think in terms of when you're working, sometimes you don't have an option of the situation you find yourself in. And you don't have the luxury of saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this person, because what if this person is your supervisor, or what if this is a person you need to manage? Then how are you going to move through a situation that you feel like, this is racism. This is not something I feel comfortable with, or it could be the flip side. And the other term that I heard, this was several years ago, in talking to the guest that's going to be coming on, and she refers to it as, no matter what side of the fence you're on, whether you're white or whether you're a person of color, we've got to figure out how we're going to communicate, how we're going to get along. And for me, it's how are we going to move towards being one human nation. So as we prepare ourselves to think about the topics that we're going to be talking to our guests about, I want to, again, encourage you, if you haven't taken the implicit association test, there is a link at the website onehumannation.info, and there are a variety of different implicit association tests, because our defense mechanism is, I don't have any bias. And I think we can all agree that we do all have some bias to some extent. It's a question of, are we aware of what the bias is? And if it's an unconscious bias, how do we start peeling the onion to get down to those layers that may create tension within us, and to figure out how are we going to start moving through reconciliation. So when you go to the implicit association test link that's on the website, you'll see that there are several different tests you can take, and this is for your own personal use. This is for you to kind of gauge, well, where am I? There is an implicit association test that's associated with Native American versus white American. There's an implicit association test for age. Some people are not comfortable about dealing with older people and vice versa. So it's to indicate whether you have a preference for young or old. For weight, there is it will reveal whether you have an automatic preference for thin people relative to fat people. There is an implicit association test for Asian American, gender, and of course, race, to distinguish between European and African American, or white over black. And it goes on and on and on. And the other one that I would encourage you, because we're going to get into this topic, if you have already taken the one that's associated with race, and this is the caller coming in, so I'm going to go to put you on hold, and we're going to come back with the caller. So we're back with our guest. Teresa, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Fabulous. And you can hear us okay?
Sure can.
Okay. I'm still on my training wheel, so I've got my trainer here making sure that I've got the sound where everybody can hear, and we're doing okay. So thanks for joining me, and just kind of want to start with just giving an idea that Teresa and I have known each other for several years. I met her when I was living in Austin, and she was one of the first people that I reached out to as part of the whole race reconciliation initiative that's now called the One Human Race Initiative. So Teresa was with me when I was, for want of a better word, voluntold to start participating in these workshops in 2012. And it was, so I understand the pain when I talk about the tension. When I was initially asked to participate, I was very reluctant. And then in 2014, when obviously the problem of race in this country wasn't going away, I reached out to Teresa, and she was gracious enough to accept the challenge of really working those workshops into place that are now ongoing there in the Austin market. So Teresa, kind of start us kind of with the basics of when were you first aware that there was something within you that had a bias to skin color? When was the first time that even hit your psyche?
Well, I think, which is interesting because I did go, obviously I'm white. I went to a black high school. I was part of a magnet program there, and I found out a lot of things there, which was interesting, but I wasn't really aware of my bias until after I graduated, and I spent some time with my uncle in Burkina Faso. And because I was staying longer than expected, I got some jobs while I was there. I was really horrible at all of them, each and every one of them. The deal was that there were certain jobs that they had to hire Americans for, and there weren't that many Americans in Ouagadougou.
So
anyway, I found myself doing warehouse inventory for the government accounting office. And that meant that at 20 years of age, I was sent on a minibus with a crew of around 5 working out day workers every day to this giant warehouse with no air conditioning. And I was supposed to write down all the inventory numbers on everything. And that was going okay until we came to the air conditioners.
Okay.
And the air conditioners were stacked in this enormous block that was higher than my head. It was like a house-sized block of boxes of air conditioners. And I looked at that and I thought, there is no way that I can see the numbers on all of those boxes, right? Because most of the numbers were facing inward and they were buried in this giant mountain. So, I looked at the guys and I tried to talk with them. I was learning French, and French was not their first language, so we kind of barely had a language in common. And as usual, they told me just to sit down and they take care of it, and they would call me when they needed me. And that's what they mostly did because, obviously they didn't really need my help.
Right.
So I sat there for a little while. I had no idea what they were doing. And after a while, they called me over. It's like, okay, we're ready for you now. And one guy crawled up on top of this house-sized block of air conditioners, and he was a tiny little guy. I mean, he was shorter than I was, maybe 100 pounds, probably 40, but looked 70. He had lost more than one finger to various accidents. And this guy, he crawled up on top, and he reached down his hand, and he just looked at me. And I just looked at him. I didn't take his hand. I just stood there and hesitated. Yeah, it was a tough moment. And then it got way worse because he looked at me with just this look of compassion
And so
and he said to me,
and just to clarify before you continue, Teresa, it was because the person that was reaching down to you was African. He was Black.
He was Black. He was male. He was different from me in every possible way.
Okay.
Every possible way. And I didn't know what he was planning for me, right?
Right.
So it wasn't just touching someone who was so different. It was also trusting myself to that person.
Right.
Trusting that you know what you're doing, and I'm going to go with whatever you have in mind. So there I was in my hesitation, and he looked with great compassion, and he said in French, he said, "I'm sorry, but if you want to come up, you're going to have to touch my hands."
Mm. Yeah, and I am sure, just because I know you've told this story before, I know it's emotional for you to tell that story, Teresa, because that's truly tension. That's truly moment of, there's no way that you can fake it, that there was some other intention involved, because there you are there. And
and I always say it's such a good thing that I didn't know more French and that we weren't doing this in English, because if I were, I would have gone into my white person explanation and denial, right?
Right.
And I would have explained to him all about how that wasn't what it was about, blah, blah, blah. Luckily, I didn't have the language skills to do that, so I just took his hand.
Right.
And he pulled me up on top of the refrigerators, and it turned out, the air conditioners, and it turned out that they had rearranged them in such a way that there were sort of wells down, like air shafts in between.
Right.
Them. And so for the rest of that afternoon, they lowered me down into those shafts with my clipboard and my flashlight, and I copied down numbers.
Yeah.
But I do know that after that, the mood between me and these guys was different.
So describe how it was different. Different bad or different good?
No, different good. Different good. It was as though, because I was willing eventually to take his hand, and because I was willing to trust them. Right. They seemed to accept me more. There was more laughter. We had a better time on the job. Okay.
So, that happened with you when you were in your 20s. And
I was 20 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I know, from the sound of your voice, you can't tell how much older you are than 20. But how
I'm a lot older.
I know. We both are. So how did things progress from that point for you? Now, because then you had that awareness that there was something inside you that really did have that initial problem with someone because of the color of their skin. So how did that shape you in, how did that impact you going forward?
I think for a long, long time, it just sort of remained dormant. I came back to the States, and I sort of went back to my white life.
Okay.
And I think it didn't really come out until later, but I think later on, as an adult, I was much more, I think having seen that in myself, I was aware of it.
Right.
And began to correct for it until eventually, it mostly wore away. I think the next time I was really in a situation where that was tested was probably when I was 40 and I bought my first house. I bought it in what was then an almost all Hispanic neighborhood. And I actually loved that neighborhood, and I loved my neighbors. I have to say, there was some initial reluctance there. For instance, my neighbor across the street, he was one of these guys who had the tattoos and the braid down his back. He had that vato look, right?
Right.
And so the first time I saw Johnny, I was sort of like, whoa. And then I just reminded myself, it's like just treat people like people. And so, I remember just kind of nodding and waving at him. And he turned out to be the sweetest guy in the world.
So that really taps into what we've been talking about, external culture. When we see someone that looks different, when we hear a different language, and the judgments we make can have an impact on how we're going to interact with that person from that point forward.
Absolutely. And I could have just, clutched my purse and scurried into my house and locked the door,
Right.
And I never would have known him.
Right. And so fast forwarding on, and just for the listening audience, in a couple of minutes, what we're going to probably do is take a break so we can do some station identification. But Teresa, I will ask for you to stay on the line because I do want to get through all of our topics. But when you fast forward, and what kind of response did you receive once you got married? Because I know that was a name change for you, going from, an American
Turner.
name, Turner, to your married name. So how did that change positively as well as negatively?
I was surprised when I took my husband's last name. I really expected that I would get a lot of surprise and a lot of people like, "You're not a Chang." And it has happened a few times, but much, much less than I would have thought.
Okay.
Mostly people just seem to accept it, which has been surprising to me.
Do you think that it's because it's more acceptable to have an Asian American name than if it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think that's totally true. For instance, I was concerned when I got engaged. I was concerned that my West Texas grandma was not going to be cool with this, because I know how she felt about people of various ethnicities, and I really thought, this may not go well. But I brought him to meet her when she was, I think like 92, and she loved him, and she was fine. So. Yeah,
Right.
I kind of got off easy on that one.
Yeah, so and because we were coming up to where I do need to take a break, I do want to talk to you about that interaction with family members because of where you grew up and what you've heard. So if you can hold on the line, stay on the line. That's how I wanted that to come out, not hold on to the line, but stay on. I mean, if you want to hold on to the line, you can hold on to the line. But if you'll stay on the
There's
line,
no line.
yes, just hold on. And I'm going to take a couple of breaks, or I'm going to take this short break and do these announcements. And we'll be back to talk more about your journey to get through this race reconciliation and healing and what it looked like in your world. Okay?
Cool. All righty.
UULP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUULP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate, go to the station at www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP. And you're listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And we're going to connect back with our caller, Teresa, who's talking to us about some of her experiences And we're going to get into the touchy topic of talking through experiences with family members.
Oh, that was it, huh?
Yeah, I think, Teresa, are you back? Yeah, here we are back.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I was waiting for a question.
That's okay. Hold on one second. Let me just make sure that I have got us queued up the way we need to be. I think so. Okay. So kind of describe for us where you grew up in Texas and what stories you heard growing up that had an impact on your internal culture.
Well, this is interesting because growing up, I heard two separate and different stories from different generations of my family. From my grandparents, for the most part, I heard the story of, those people, the usual stereotypes. They're dirty, they're lazy, they're untrustworthy. They're not are equal, basically.
So who were those people that?
Those were grandparents, less the grandmothers, more the grandfathers, but both of them were men of their time in that way, for sure.
So the people they were referring to, though, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah. There was black and Mexican, but out in West Texas, Mexican was sort of the big deal.
Okay.
As late as, when my grandmother was elderly, I remember driving her through West Texas and stopping at a gas station, and it turned out that it was owned by a Hispanic family, and she turned and apologized to me and said, I never would have stopped here if I'd known.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was sort of the older generation broadly. My parents, on the other hand, did not buy into that whole inferiority thing. They were also people of their time, in a certain way, as I'm a person of my time. But they definitely did not buy that narrative and did not teach me that.
Okay.
So, I would listen to my grandparents talk, and I would think that's wrong what they're saying. So, fortunately, they didn't pass all of those attitudes down to me.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because we probably wouldn't be friends today. No, I'm just kidding.
No, probably not. Yeah.
And so Teresa, would you share with us a little bit about how you got involved in the race reconciliation workshops? And as a disclaimer, you and I attended the same church in Austin, but you were there way before I was there. So how did you get involved in that part of the church that was very much doing outreach in that direction?
Well, when I came to that church, I came sort of as a giant influx of white people to a historically African-American church. And there were years of, and still we grapple with it, but especially then, there was a lot of grappling with how to maintain the culture.
Right.
And at that point, I was very aware, first, that this was absolutely where I wanted to be. And second, that in some way that I did not yet quite understand, just by being present, I could ruin this place. And I desperately did not want to do that. So whenever we had parish conversations or information sessions, I attended those. And I remember going to one session where they talked about whiteness. And that was pretty fascinating to me because I'd never really thought about whiteness before. And I remember saying to no one in particular, wow, I really hope we do some more study on this. And an African-American gentleman who is still at the church, was sitting in front of me, turned around and looked at me and said, if you want it to happen, you make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I started a whiteness reading group.
Okay.
And we met for a while.
What book were y'all reading? Because that may be of interest to people that are listening, that are on that place in their journey. If you recall.
Yeah, we read several books. The one that stands out for me is Robert Jensen's Heart of Whiteness.
Mm.
You know, if you just read one book about whiteness, that would probably be
pick one
for me. If you pick one, you know, you probably, I mean, if you're like me, you probably have to read it slowly, and you might need some alcoholic assistance with that.
Right.
It's a tough book, but it's a really good book. And I think it was probably because I was involved in organizing that Ms. Laura Houston, who is a pillar of our community and now a city councilwoman, invited me to a city workshop.
So you say invited. I was voluntold by her with the workshops, but yeah.
I think at that point I didn't realize that I couldn't say no, so I felt invited.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sure
good.
if I'd tried to say no, it probably wouldn't have worked out so well. And now I know just to say yes, ma'am. But at any rate, I felt invited to come to this workshop that the city was having based on Race, the Power of an Illusion, because she wanted to think about whether this workshop was something that might be beneficial for our church.
Okay.
So we attended. It was a one-day workshop. We loved the documentary, but we felt like there were many ways that it could be presented better.
Right.
That watching the whole Monday was overwhelming, and there wasn't really much support around change and growth. It was just sort of, here's all the information, done.
We're done. We've checked the box at the city.
Yeah.
So you go forth and figure out what you need to do with this information.
Yeah, which is probably just forget it as soon as you can because it's horrible, right? Yeah. So anyway, from there, Ms. Houston and I began tweaking things and figuring out how we would like to present this. And we did that at our church. Eventually, other churches in the area would ask us to come and do that for them. And so we were doing that, not often, just, once or twice a year as people asked us, until Ms. Sandy came. And then we went to a whole new level.
Well, and that was, I would have never gotten to that level without being, I guess, invited. Sounds better than voluntold, but I was voluntold. I understood.
You were voluntold.
I understood it because I was probably a little bit more vocal than you on why I didn't want to go. And I was given all of the reasons why I didn't think that was going to be a good idea, but she wasn't listening to that either. So, as we go through this journey and talk about reconciliation, healing, and moving towards justice, and we kind of look at it in those terms that we can't get to justice if we can't go through reconciliation, and there needs to be a healing process. As you have participated in the workshops, what has been transformative for you? What have you seen as kind of a shift in the people that become involved, and kind of, share your insight on where you would like to see that go?
Sure. What I see for people who volunteer and participate in One Human Race is mainly that we've just formed this awesome community where we are all on the same page. Not everybody's in exactly the same place on their journey, but we all have a foundation of understanding the same, we live in the same world, right?
Right.
It's not that we see the world differently. We've developed a common world view that we can build relationships on. And once you have that, it's kind of amazing how easy it is for that to happen.
Yes, it's probably a little bit easier for you, but I have seen that transformation for people attending the workshop, at least once they get past the shock and awe. I mean, once the commonality of really learning the history, that's where the productive side of this comes into play, because unfortunately, what we've been taught as the history in many instances is not accurate. And
Right.
there were several people that I remember that were white that went through it, and they were history majors, and they were
Mhm.
educated, and they were
Yeah.
they were shocked about what they didn't know.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and I know you and I both, we get that response of, well, why isn't this in the schools, and
Mhm.
why did I not know this information?
Absolutely.
So, kind of summing up for you, because I don't want to take up all of your time, because I can. I can easily do that, but I will leave the door open for you to come back and share some more insight about this journey. Is there any day that goes by for you now that you don't have to constantly focus on being awake or aware? I mean, because, with for me, I'm always aware, because obviously I'm in a
Mhm.
black
Oh
skin.
yeah.
But in Austin, it's a little bit different.
It
The
is.
the
Yeah.
predominant population there is white. It's Anglo. So, do you have days where you don't think about it? You just kind of go through your day?
No. No, I don't. I don't. I think about it every single day.
Yeah.
There's always every day there's something that I see
Which
and
is,
notice.
yeah, which is kind of sad in itself, that it's a daily. But what is really amazing to me with when I engage with you and talk to you is that
Mhm.
you are constantly awake and aware. And that's
Yeah.
what we want people to realize, and the listeners realizing, that are white and enjoy white privilege, is that you do have the
Mhm.
option. You have the option of
You do.
um, going home and closing
Tuning
your
out, yeah.
closing your door, and never having to think about it, never having to read a book about it, never needing to watch a movie about it. And there's so
Mhm.
many ways now that you can be exposed, no matter which side of the fence you're on, to the realities of, what is it going to take for us to move towards becoming one human nation.
Yeah.
So, Teresa, any closing thoughts you want to share with us, and as we wrap up this session with you?
I don't think so. I think just the important thing is to engage in some way, in some form that allows you to hear the life experiences of people who are different from you. Because hearing it in the abstract is one thing. You can hear statistics.
Right.
But if you meet somebody, if you meet Bob, and Bob tells you about how, he can't walk his kids home from school or his grandkids, because his grandkids look white and he doesn't, that makes an impression. You remember that because it's personal.
Right.
So I think just seeking out those opportunities is really important.
Well, thank you. And like I said, the door is always open for you to come to be a guest on the One Human Nation show. And I'm sure at some point in time you're going to visit me here in Savannah.
Yes, I'm sure I will.
All right, Teresa, thank you for calling, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for having me, Sandy.
And we're back with the One Human Nation show. And the caller, Teresa, you probably can tell she and I are friends, and it's always nice to hear the opposite side of the fence, and the realization that even with being informed, it never stops as far as what can be done, because unfortunately, there are daily things that can happen, especially if you're in a location that's predominantly white with very little diversity, and you don't have that opportunity to interact. I can tell you, from moving back to Savannah, it's totally different. Not that racism does not exist in Savannah. I'm not going to tell you that. I was born and raised here. But it's not as, there is not this wall that you feel when you're in a city that is only, I think the demographics for Austin now, it's like 8% African American. When I moved there, it was like 17%. And I know for some of my friends out there listening, they hate when they hear these statistics, because it's like, don't tell people that we have a declining African American population, because it's typically not what people think when they think of the Austin, Texas market. And I lived there for 30 years, so I experienced it, and it is definitely a different feel being back in Savannah. That is 51% African American. And to some extent, I think the difference is because of having more numbers, there has been more of reconciliation. It's very easy for me in Savannah to find the history. And I'm not sure if that's because Savannah is more of a historical city. I don't know whether it's based on, it's a smaller landmass, and maybe everybody had to figure out, how are we going to get along. It's definitely more diverse than when I left in the early 80s, in a good way. And I'm still learning the city. I'm still learning, of what things have changed. And I can see in certain neighborhoods that I ride through that things have shifted. When I was here and growing up and was going to a particular elementary school, Windsor Forest Elementary School, it was predominantly white. The neighborhood that we rode the bus through was predominantly white. And that neighborhood has changed, and I'm still learning the history of how housing has shifted here in the Savannah market, just like it has in other places. And on that note, because we are getting close to the top of the hour, I do want to talk to you about some things that are posted on the One Human Nation website, because I'm going to probably be switching out some of these videos, and I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to go and watch some of these videos before they're switched out. One of the videos is from the PBS series that we were talking about earlier, Race, the Power of an Illusion. In Race, the Power of Illusion, this documentary has different episodes. It was produced by the California Newsreel. And the clip that's posted, one of them is entitled The Difference Between Us. The next clip that's from the same documentary, Race, the Power of an Illusion, is entitled The Story We Tell. And the reason I really want you to take a look at that and watch that clip is that it starts talking about the history of housing in the United States and what happened when the government developed programs to make it easier for veterans to access housing and who was excluded out of that. And if you're familiar with the real estate market, you know that is one of the mechanisms for accumulating wealth. And so it's important to know about how that has been a part of our history. And the third documentary that's posted there was one that I actually saw while I was in Austin, and it's entitled The House I Live In. And when you take a look at that particular documentary, it's really getting into the truth behind the drug wars and who does that really target, and what the impact is having in our country as it relates to the system of mass incarceration. So I do encourage you to take a look at those videos, because at some point I am going to be switching them out and putting up some new video clips to kind of keep everything fresh on the website. And if you have an interest in sharing your story with me, you can do so by sending an email to mystory@onehumannation.info. That email address again is mystory@onehumannation.info. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back to wrap up this episode of the One Human Nation Show. And we're back with the One Human Nation show. I do want to provide this disclaimer that the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program were not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. As a reminder, we invite you to tune in on Thursdays from 5 to 6 Eastern Standard Time to the One Human Nation show. You are encouraged to complete the implicit association test so you can start doing your assessment on your journey, finding out where you are, what biases that you have. And remember, this is not about judgment, and that's a very hard thing to do, especially on such a touchy subject like race. It's very easy to judge, especially when you hear something that you think is blatantly racist, or you see something that you think is blatantly racist. It's hard not to make a judgment, and I definitely agree. If you see something and you have the power to make a change, make a change. We do encourage you at all times to keep yourself safe, and in the situation that you find yourself in. We do everything we can. The people that disclose their names on the show, that's totally their call to make. It's if you don't want to disclose your name, if you want to just email your story and you say, Sandy, I'm not ready to go on the air, but if you can share my story without saying my name, and I totally understand that, because you may be in a situation at work and we're not going to name employers or any of that kind of stuff. But if you want to share your story, and this may be the only place you can feel safe in sharing your story, we encourage you to send an email to mystory@onehumannation.info. As a reminder, we do post the recording, so maybe you have people that and I hope you're encouraging people to listen to this show, and they're wondering where they can hear a recording. Encourage them to go to the website www.onehumannation.info to listen to the show. And if you are addicted to your mobile device, you can also pull down the streaming license so that you can listen to the show on your mobile device. And you would do that by going to www.wruu.org, and you can stream the show as well as the station, obviously, on your mobile device. I look forward to talking to you next week. We're going to have another guest speaker, and this time it's going to be from a male perspective, of a white male perspective on their story, their journey, and maybe it'll inspire you on your walk so that you can, start the talk with people either in your family or in your community, so that we can move towards being one human nation. As we get ready to close off today's show, our next guest or our next show coming up is Sound Limit with Troy Stoner. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking to you next week.